We called it a leadership summit, not a leadership day. 3 hours for one. We typically did them 3 times a year. We did one spring, summer, fall kind of idea. And just try it. Go for one. See what happens when people start having an awareness that they're a leader, that they were invested in, and that something's different.
Welcome to Divine Renovation's Missional Leadership Podcast. Here's your host, Tammy LeBlanc.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Missional Leadership Podcast. I am thrilled today because how cool is this? I get to meet Matt in the flesh and, of course, Rob, and we are coming to you all in person together. So welcome, guys. It is so great to be in the same room for our podcast.
This is a fun experience, and I love the subtext of that. It's like, it's cool to have Matt here. Oh, no, yeah, by the way, Rob, you're here too. That's good, yeah.
It's always great to see you, Rob.
No, it is really a cool experience to have Matt with us in the flesh.
Yeah.
And not have to do this through Zoom. Or no, I guess we don't do it through Zoom. We do it through whatever
Nathan tells us to do it through.
Yeah, whatever Nathan tells us to do it through, yeah.
Yes, Nathan always saves us with the technology. Speaking of which, we had a bit of a hiccup today with our technology plans. We didn't have the greatest welcome for you to Halifax,
Today
Matt.
was the hiccup. Yesterday was the hiccup.
Fair enough. So you arrived last night.
Yeah, Rob rubbed it in today, by the way, that he drove 15 minutes to get here. Mine was a 12-hour journey, a couple flights.
Yeah.
And the last flight, this is just to say that something good must come out of this podcast because I thought I was going to die yesterday. Worst flight experience of my life. That was the great welcome you guys gave me. A rainstorm above freezing. I can get that in Houston. So I'm still waiting for my first trip to St. Benedict's and a second trip to Halifax, first trip here to see what is really in store.
So we rolled out our best rain and windstorm for you, which obviously impacted your flight. We're glad you survived it. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, I knew we were in trouble when it started with a medical emergency, and praise the Lord, that turned out okay before the flight. But then when they got on and said, just leave your seatbelts on.
Oh my goodness.
Rosary came out of pocket. Jesus and I hung out for 2 straight hours. Best prayer experience of my life. But I thought it was the last day of my life.
Oh, wow.
I hate to fly. There's a little insider tip from Matt. I hate to fly, even though I do it a bit.
That's one of our love languages, is we share our fear of flying.
So true.
Yeah.
Lord, why did you ask this of me?
Yeah.
I'm not a flyer either. Do you remember last time I flew with you and how sick I was getting off? And it was just, can you please get me home as quick as possible because I need to go to the toilet.
And I'm jealous of people that just get airsick because I'm like up there preparing to fall out of the sky.
That's right. I love air sickness. Over
like
you guys have got to be kidding me. It's the worst ever.
It would be preferential. As a guy that grew up on boats, I know what it's like to be sick. In fact, when you were telling the story of, it's going to start out bad, I grew up and we had a ferry on the island, and we knew it was going to be a bad trip because they had these ropes that came down from the chairs. And if they were tying the ropes into the floor, they were doing that because they need to hold the chairs in place.
Oh, no.
And so as a kid growing up, you knew what the ferry ride home was going to be like because they were starting to tie the chairs down. So when you were telling that experience of, when they were telling you to keep your seatbelts on, that was kind of where my mind went.
The first thing I do when I get on the plane is make sure that there's the puke bag in the pocket in the seat in front of me.
I checked.
And now my son, who was traveling with me last, takes his out of his pocket and puts it in front of my seat. So I have multiple bags now.
What a sweet son.
Right. So what brings you to Halifax?
Well, I'm here to do an event here at the parish. Actually, a few events. I'm going to lead a staff retreat and then do an event for the whole parish on the weekend. Going to go to the youth group tonight. I mean, once you arrive here, it's like, what else can we cram in? Sure. We might as well do some podcast recording. I think this is is this an old shower or a money counting room or whatever it is at the parish?
We're sitting in the old money counting room.
It does feel like a little kid in a candy store to come to a place like Halifax and St. Benedict's, like the birthplace of so much of what we do in Renewal. So I'm taking lots of pictures, meeting lots of people, and just really, really ready to see what the Lord wants to do here.
Well, I, for one, am looking forward to attending the mission and hearing what you have to share with us, Matt.
Thanks.
Glad to welcome you here to Halifax.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Love it.
So let's dive into today's topic. We are going to be talking about leadership development days. It's kind of a generic term, and the ministry we tend to call them leadership summits. But essentially, it's a way of investing in leaders because we talk about that as one of our keys, the best of leadership, meaning one of the 3 keys that's essential to parish renewal. And so we want to start taking a look at how do we develop leaders? Maybe for some, they're not really sure where to begin. It's just, does that mean training them to do a job? That's kind of, I think, where my mind goes as the easiest starting point. But it's so much more than training them to do a job. So maybe do one of you guys want to just give a quick overview of what a leadership day or summit is?
I know that we're talking about all the different why, what, wins kind of things, but really it's the why, right? And if you think about why in the first place, why is about casting vision. And so when you gather leaders together, before we get into, okay, what should the day look like, which we should talk about, and who should be invited, we should talk about that. I think it's important to know, why would we even do that?
For sure.
And how we invest in leaders and how we launch them and how we align them and how we cast vision, which sound like soft topics, but they are essential to getting all of the more solid topics set. Yep. So maybe the why, just to realize this is a day to gather leaders, to cast vision and align people. And maybe that's just a starting point. And Rob can kind of share a little more about that.
Yeah. If you want to be intentional about leadership in your parish, what this does is it creates a unique environment for that. And anytime you want to create a unique culture or even a movement, when you create its own event, that helps set the tone for the parish beyond what you do inside the event itself. And it's not the only thing that hopefully you do for leadership development, but to create a unique environment for just that is an amazingly powerful way to shape your culture around leaders. And if you want a leadership intensive environment, then it helps serve that purpose. It's such a powerful culture shaping tool for a parish as well. So, and the why is casting vision is central to it, investing in leaders, believing in people, and really just even the community of people coming together that are leaders. Because leadership is so lonely. So if you're a small group leader, or if you're overseeing a particular ministry, things like that, a lot of times you're trying to recruit people, and you're dealing with problems and all that sort of stuff. It can weigh you down. And to come into a unique environment where other people share those same frustrations or those same challenges can, again, help create kind of that environment and culture of other people kind of understanding what it is that you're going through as well.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking as a person attending it, you're going to get a lot out of me if you're investing in me, because I feel valued as a leader in this parish.
Right. You know, one thing that happened at the very first leadership summit at our parish that we did back in Houston, where it rains and is windy like it is here today. But that aside, I'm not bitter. Back in Houston, we did our first leadership summit. I remember we had all of these, like, here's what we want the outcomes to be. Here's what success would look like. Here's what we hope to accomplish. But something got accomplished that we didn't expect. And that was a number of the leaders that we had invited came to us and said, I didn't realize I was a leader.
Yeah.
Like actually naming them as a leader because they were invited to be in the room. Right. And we're like, we almost assumed that was already a foregone conclusion that you knew you were a leader and you're aware of that.
Yeah.
So naming them and them almost identifying as a leader. Now what could you do with people that are identifying as a leader as part of the mission?
Well, we had the opposite experience, because we'd say we're doing this leadership summit and we'd invite people and they'd say, I can't come. I'm not a leader. Yeah. And it gave us the opportunity to have the conversation with them as well, right? And so it kind of that reverse. But yeah, it does give you an unique experience to speak into people's lives as leaders in your parish.
I can so relate to that, because I remember being the person getting the invite to it and having that thought, but I'm not a leader. But after attending a number of them again and being invested in and starting to realize, oh, okay, I can be a leader, maybe not in the traditional sense that I thought of as a leader, like who's always, the step in, the take charge, always make the decisions. But there's so many different facets of leadership. Yep. And so it's starting to come to that understanding through the parish taking the time to invest in me. I can relate to that. So guys, let's talk a bit more in depth about, we're saying invite your leaders, but who makes a leader? Let's talk about who's going to come to these, because is it ministry leads? Is that a leader? Yeah. Who are these people that we're inviting?
Fundamentally, every church has to ask themselves the question, who do we want to invest in? So it begins there. So for example, one of the things that happened at St. Benedict was we'd invite all the quote unquote ministry leaders, who's kind of at the top of the org chart in each of the ministries. But then one of the things we'd also do as a way to help them develop others is say, hey, if there's a high potential person that you see that you'd like to develop, that you think could be a leader, invite them along too. Depending on how you want to shape it. So for example, In some churches, you might have one person that's over small groups, so that person could come. Or you could invite each of your small group leaders. So that would have to be kind of a fundamental decision that a parish would need to answer. Do you want all your small group leaders there, or do you just want the person or the team that's over your small groups, kind of a thing, right? So there's a little bit of kind of thinking through how you'd want to define that as well.
And that would need to happen maybe in your senior leadership team meeting, your higher leadership, to decide what's the purpose of this. If it's an initial vision cast, the more the merrier, right? Maybe. I mean, you got to decide that, because then if you're going to do one every 3 months, then someone gets invited to the first one and doesn't get invited to the second one.
Yeah.
That could be weird. But you do think maybe a little more broadly when you're trying to cast vision, to try and get vision out into the community. Because I know one thing that a parish that I work with in Europe struggled with is they've been working on their vision now for a year, and their team is super aligned on it, but they're realizing they're getting some resistance and trying to roll it out. But they hadn't yet done a leadership summit. And it was like a light bulb moment for them to say, oh, this would be a great way, get them all in the same room, hear the same message. And so then that creates new messengers out in the community to share the vision too. So when someone's sitting next to you in the pew, like, well, I don't understand why we're doing this. Someone that's at the leadership summit could actually say, well, here's what I heard, or here's why. They could become those vision carriers and casters also. And so to think about the why, why we're gathering for this specific leadership summit. If you have one that's a little more strategic, or maybe it's around a tactical shift that's going to happen in the parish, you want to make sure the stakeholders are there. So deciding how to invite, is it always the same crowd? Is it going to vary? And then I think here's the important thing to realize, that you're never going to invite all the people that think they should have been there.
Yeah.
And so how do you deal with that? How do you deal with people who say, well, I wasn't invited?
Good question,
it's gonna
Matt.
happen.
How do you deal with it?
Well, I was going to ask Rob that question. So Rob, in your coaching experience, how do you deal with that?
Well, not to completely avoid that question.
But to avoid it, yes.
We'll come back to it.
Yeah. One other group that, and I don't remember us doing this at St. Benedict, but some churches do, and I think it's wise. Parishes have people who might not be in official leadership roles, but are opinion leaders, and shape and shape a lot of what other people think. Sometimes they're intentional about inviting them as well. But yeah, as far
but why? Why would they invite them?
You're casting vision, and depending on how you do it, right? There's no one way to do this, but you are giving people higher levels of insider knowledge, for probably lack of a better term, right?
Okay.
And it does create another environment for you to win people over.
Okay.
So for example, one of the things that we did at St. Benedict was, we wanted all of the finance council there. We wanted all of the pastoral council there. We wanted all of, the committees and things like that. And those are people that are more in official roles. But in some parishes, you have that person, they've been there the longest, or their family is associated with it, or their grandfather was the one that built the original parish, and it just creates more alignment between those people within your parish. It does create that ability to have higher levels of communication that can make leadership decisions and winning other people over easier. This is a larger leadership issue, but the fact of the matter is that a priest is the leader of the parish. Priest might not have the most influence in a parish. And if you know who has more influence than the priest, a leadership environment has the ability to invite them in and to begin to win them over and help you move forward in the parish.
That's a good point in itself. I think we all naturally think that the priest has the most influence, but that's not always the case if he has like a real key side partner that he works with. Yeah.
So Rob, I'm not going to let you off the hook.
Yes, let's go back to that question.
But it's good to remember it, because that the who gets left off. It doesn't mean that every influential person that thinks they have influence or has opinion should be invited. Because we also have those toxic kind of sideshows that can happen at a parish. And just because of that doesn't mean they get invited, because if they show up, they might derail your entire leadership summit. So Rob, how do you deal with those that don't get included?
It is about who has official roles, and then who has the ability in those official roles to invite others. And so from a leadership team that's inviting people, we're just going through the org chart. Yeah. And it's a fairly black and white decision, because we want all ministry leaders there, and it's an opportunity to support them. And then after that, who else gets kind of invited will depend on who the other ministry leaders invite. So we don't make 100% of the decisions of these are the 85 people that are invited. No. These are the 50 or 60 people we've invited. We've widened it where they can invite other people.
Where they're investing in someone.
Right.
That's a great idea. So gives you a good backstop.
And it's funny. One of the things I was thinking about, like the summits that we had were amazing times. Like everybody walked away excited. And I remember us having a conversation because to your point, who gets to come and who doesn't. I was in a coffee shop and I was talking to a lady here and we were just kind of discussing. She said, yeah, I'm stepping down out of leadership. And she said, I need to find another leadership position so I can get back to get back to the leadership
Stay
summit.
on the list.
Yeah, she wanted to because she loved the leadership summit so much. She knew I'm not a leader, so I can't go. So I need to step back into leadership so I can get back into the leadership summits. I still remember that conversation, right? So I don't remember us having a lot of conversations around you're in, you're out kind of a thing. But there was an awareness that, this is who it's for. Yeah. And this is a way that we serve people who are serving. So.
Yes, her story gets back to, again, that fact that it feels good to be invested in, that somebody wants to put that effort and time into. I remember in the earlier days of the ministry, some of the parishes we were coaching didn't feel equipped to host these leadership summits because I remember they would actually ask if a coach could come and do the leadership summit for them and wrestling with that. It's like, well, that wasn't really the intention of coaching. So let's talk a little bit now maybe about what leadership summits look like.
That is interesting you bring that up because I've probably participated in half a dozen leadership summits at parishes, mostly over Zoom, which is nice because that can just be, hey, we'd love you to hear from the ministry that we're joining forces with Divine Renovation. And maybe it was just a little talk on inspiring them or giving a vision cast idea to set up the team. Because so many times they do feel maybe ill-equipped to be that mouthpiece on behalf of the parish. Yeah. But I think that's what makes Leadership Summit so real. Because one of the other big things that a summit does, and we're using the terms like you have to brand it as a leadership summit. Would you call it at the beginning of leadership days, development day, whatever it is? It reinforces your leadership structure. So when they see those senior leadership team members in that role of leadership, they say, okay, maybe I don't have to go to the pastor for everything. Father was serious about having a leadership team. Oh, here's what they do. So it's all of those intended consequences, which might lie under the surface that happen at a leadership summit. So the idea is really to raise up that level of leadership from pastor to leadership team to execute these days. And I don't just mean order the food. You can have other people order the food if you're going to offer food. But to cement themselves as I'm going to lead. I'm not just named a leader. I'm actually going to do it and I'm going to lead you. So it starts to align that whole thing when it happens. So I would say to a parish that doesn't feel equipped, that you could talk to a coach at Divine Renovation, or you could talk to someone in our ministry about how to do them. Rob even has a little structure, like a layout of the day, and it's really simple. I think the hardest two pieces of a summit are the discussion we just had about who to invite and how to invite them. And then what do you want maybe the content or the purpose or the theme of that day to be? Once you tackle those two things, getting people in a room, feeding them if you're going to offer them food, giving them a chance to maybe do some breakouts after you've given them some of the content, pray together, name them as leaders, and inspire them to go out and share vision. You don't even have to have a dress code for that.
I remember in the early days of St. Benedict and attending, there was just a real sense of we're in this together.
Yes.
Because, yes, the leaders of the parish that maybe were hosting the summit were free to admit, like, we don't know where we're going, but we are on this journey and we're going to go on it together. And these are the things that we're learning. And so I totally appreciated that a lot of it was experimentative, but that's what was exciting because we were all in this adventure together.
Yes. Yeah. There's a few different elements as far as what you do there. Like, again, it's an opportunity to cast vision. And to your point, Matt, it doesn't, I would say generally it was, Father James or Father Simon, whoever the priest was, but it doesn't always have to be them. So it creates an avenue for other people to cast vision. We'd always go into a little bit higher level detail around communication issues. What are things that's important for that group of people to know that you wouldn't share off the altar, or right? Like it's a little bit more like leadership oriented around that. So if something significant is changing, or if there's a particular problem that you want to address at the leadership level, things like that, and create that. And then another key aspect for us was we would try to go into some aspect of practical leadership around, okay, this is how you have a team meeting, or this is how you recruit a volunteer, or this is how you cast vision, or so some practical skill to actually help them. So, kind of giving them the big picture, kind of give them some insider information to help them feel like they are a leader in the parish. And so you're sharing things, again, appropriately, not that will actually is meaningful and important for people who are in leadership. And then you're trying to give them some type of actual practical skill around that. And that's where a lot of times we do the breakout piece. So we get them to practice, or we get them to discuss with each other, or, because we'd have them at tables and things along those lines. And then we would always end with a prayer time. And we would do kind of like what the prayer triads at Alpha would look like. And we'd always go through, we'd model them for them, and then we'd encourage them all to step into it. And we didn't force everybody, so occasionally there was leaders that wouldn't, things like that. But we always ended with worship and prayer, and that's kind of the tone that we set everybody out on.
Yeah, I think, Rob, as you say that, it's coming back to what you said earlier, which is really important about like setting culture. That if you left from a leadership summit and you had normalized what it looks like to pray with people and over people, that would be a successful leadership summit. Because now it's not just the team doing that, or you're not talking about it. You now are empowering people by normalizing it, practicing it, and then sending them out and regularly visiting that so they can do it in their ministries too.
Yeah. I remember too, it was also a place for, if you're inviting somebody into, for example, the music ministry, and they weren't ready to necessarily join the mass, they could start by helping with praise and worship at the leadership summit. Or if you're trying to grow somebody in that ability to lead praise and worship for their own ministry, then that would be an area where, you could do the I see in you and you watch and I do. And I'm not getting all the wording right, but essentially it's that apprenticeship model where you come alongside me and we're going to practice it in this safe space kind of thing. And then you can go out and do it in your own ministries. So another aspect of our leadership summits that I really enjoyed was they were fun. Like, I think making them fun is an important aspect, right? And maybe how do we serve? Like, this is a chance, for us to serve our leaders and again, make them feel loved and valued.
So invite your youth minister to lead icebreakers. Or, it is a good point, right? Like, if that's not your natural disposition, your love language, your charism is to outwardly care for people, this should be a chance to care for people, not just name them as a leader. You're not just cementing them in an org chart. Right. You do want to care for them, let them feel invested in and cared for and loved. And the ways to do that are that they have fun.
Yeah. So put the person that has that disposition, that personality, that skill set in that role.
Like Tammy LeBlanc.
We're going to have a dance party today.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. One leadership summit was all about thanking.
That was the topic.
Yeah, that was the topic that week. And we went through and we listed the different teams and things like that. And we highlighted some different aspects of what they accomplished. Yeah, so the whole day was actually a thank you. And then one of the times, because we would normally do these on a Saturday morning, we did it on a Friday night where we actually served a meal to them. And again, we did that one time just as hey, we're, a lot of times we do coffee and donuts and some things like that and have a really good spread there. But yeah, we just said we wanted to go a little above and beyond, and we did a whole meal for them. We did it on a Friday night as well. So we're always trying to think in terms of, how are we thanking them? How are we showing appreciation for them? And how are we creating a fun environment that where, it's like the conversation I had with that lady, they wanted to be there. Like, I very rarely ever heard people speak negatively about it. Even as a staff person and someone that was generally involved with planning them and executing them, always walked away jazzed and just thankful to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's true that it gets them out of the functional mode or the doing mode.
Yeah.
Because how much of what happens at a parish, or at least in people's lived experience of leadership in a parish, is all about the tasks they do.
Yeah.
So imagine doing an entire one around thanks. They're like, okay, what's the catch? Where are they about to hit me up for something else?
Yeah.
But it just really pours into them. And we did ours, and we call them leadership days.
But let's tighten that up. Is it a full day? What are we looking at? Because we also want to be aware of people's time and their attention span and whatnot. So what are we really looking at here?
I mean, I think people should experiment, right? If you've got a retreat center nearby and you want to go for it, try it. But you also want to expand attendance. So making it as accessible as possible without sacrificing what you want to do, which would mean we called it a leadership summit, not a leadership day. We did it in the morning from I think people gathered at 8:30 in the morning, and we had breakfast for them. And it wasn't just the church coffee and donuts that they normally get. It was like kolache. Do you have kolaches up here?
No,
No.
I don't know what a
Oh my
kolache
gosh,
is.
here
Matt.
goes the podcast. Kolaches are a couple different things for us. Or do you have like pigs in a blanket?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
Hot
The little
dogs
hot
wrapped
dogs,
in a.
yeah.
in a
pastry
bread.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
We'd call that a pig in a blanket. That's also what we would call kolaches in the South. Although any of the Czech influenced people that also live in Texas would just have turned the podcast off when I called that a kolache, because a real kolache is a little pastry with like fruit sitting in the top.
Oh, okay. That sounds more breakfasty than a hot dog in a bun.
So kolache is Latin for wrapped in dough. Is that kind of regardless of what?
Maybe someone can correct us, or in the comments they can tell us, or send us your favorite kolache recipe. But we would serve people kolaches, all the kinds of kolaches. We actually have a place in Houston called the Kolache Factory. This is not a commercial, but you pick up boxes of, sometimes they'd stuff them with like eggs and bacon in the middle of the bread. Now that will change your life.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, now you're winning me over.
That will change your life. Yeah. See, now people are having fun. We're just talking about food. So we would feed people. We'd feed them fruit. You know, they'd be like, wow. People would always wonder how much this cost, because they're not used to being invested in.
Right.
Right. And so now if you fed them something like that and they fall asleep, you know, you're not held to a higher standard. But at the same time, if you fed them and make them happy and they have some fun and they connect with other leaders, now they're more open to hear what you're going to share.
Yeah.
This isn't a bait and switch, but it all works together.
No, it's a good point.
I think part of it for a leadership team or whoever is responsible for it, running these, like to be intentional. And not that we didn't sometimes, fly by the seat of our pants occasionally, but for the most part, we went in with a pretty intentional plan. We knew what we wanted to do. The MC is key. Someone that can carry the day, create a fun tone. All the other leaders as well, setting the scene for everybody, I think is so important, because you do. And by saying that it's fun doesn't mean you don't want people to take it seriously. Like
Correct.
What you're doing is very important. It's not is this going to be serious or is this going to be fun, right? It's a both and in that. So we were talking about very important topics, things that affected the parish, things that affected people's leadership, but we were doing them in a way that made it more engaging.
Now we did end by lunch because we didn't want to feed them 2 meals.
Yeah.
It was a 3-hour timestamp for us typically.
I think we aimed for 2.5 hours, but ended up being done. So we would, again, 8:30 to 9 be kind of the registration time, start at 9. I think we generally try to be done at 11:30, but we're probably closer to 12.
By the time everybody leaves, it's 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, are there any things that we want to be aware of, maybe that are not the right space to address in a leadership summit? Or is this also a space where we want to seek input from leaders?
First thing I'd say is knowing the difference between feedback and Q&A. That we want feedback, but less about what they thought of the day, right? That's one thing. I'm not looking for an evaluation of what you thought of the food or the speaker's joke or that sort of thing. We turn people into consumers too easily. So feedback should be, how did you receive this? What resonated for you? How are you feeling empowered to lead? So we're almost directed feedback, right? Rather than open-ended. And I also would hesitate to start a Q&A at the end of a day. Because I think Q&A, while good, people can get clarity, the leadership summit with 30, 50, 70, 100 people in the room might not be the right tone. It will turn into a town hall. And you will get the opinionated folks asking maybe tough questions or derailing questions, or maybe even a toxic question that could derail the whole day. And that's what people are then left with is, wow, did you hear Betty? Sorry, Betty's listening. Did you hear Joe raise that question at the end? Or he seemed like he was totally derailing the day. That's what they're left with. It doesn't mean there's not a place for people to wrestle with what they just heard. But I think this should inform now how we do our one-on-one meetings, our team meetings, and some of the group meetings that should come from the day. Okay. That we can deal with people needing to make that shift.
Yep.
In those gatherings rather than in the leadership summit itself. And I'll tell you, naturally, if you don't offer an opportunity for Q&A, the people that were sitting on a question are going to catch you after it's over anyway. And the nice thing is they got the answer to their question without the rest of the room having to hear it.
Yeah. This is one aspect of how you're supporting and communicating. It's not the whole aspect.
Exactly.
Right?
Amen.
So you need to have a structure where there's two-way communication happening with your leaders. And an open mic is not the time to create that.
Amen.
At a leadership summit. I think kind of along that line as well is addressing the right topics to leaders. And sometimes, there's different times when we'd go through maybe challenging seasons and, there'd be some problems. And so we'd address those problems. But whatever topic you're going to pick, make sure that it's applicable to the whole room. Because sometimes the temptation is, let's say you've got 50 ministries and you have problems with 4 or 5 leaders. And rather than dealing with those problems, we're going to make that a leadership summit. So we're going to talk about the problem and we're going to make the 45 leaders that aren't a problem sit through and endure this.
Or wonder if they're the problem.
Yeah, or wonder if they're the problem rather than just dealing with the problem itself.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes maybe there's some bigger issues that affect wider scopes and, that can be appropriate. But a lot of times we'll use these environments to try to deal, subversively with problems that just we need to deal with head on. And what can happen is, to your point, they can wonder if they're the problem, or everybody knows what the problem is happening. And they're saying these leaders don't want to deal with it directly.
And then the funny thing is the people that are actually the problem don't actually think they're the problem. They think it's everybody else. Yeah. So it's just a terrible communication strategy.
Yeah. And so, like making sure that it's appropriate. And again, I think this is an important environment to address things sometimes maybe, but I wouldn't make that the goal. What's the problem we're going to address in this leadership summit?
Right.
Because I would say in the 6 years out at St. Benedict, I can think of one time, maybe a second time, when that was, again, part of what we did at a summit. It wasn't the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Generally, it was about casting vision. It was about moving forward. And it was about developing leaders. It wasn't about creating this environment where there was problems. It's like, okay, here's the part of the show where, so-and-so stands up and rants about what's not going right. So you don't want to be going down that road very often in these environments.
Yeah. And to your question too, Tammy, about like what to be aware of, the cadence matters because that can set you up for like how you want to travel through the year and what you want to go from one to the other. So if we did these, 3 hours for one, we typically did them 3 times a year. We did one spring, summer, fall kind of idea. Yeah. And so you can think through at a leadership level, what would we like these 3 to be about this year? Maybe you've got a priority for the year that you really want to lean to, or a couple priorities you want to lean into. But to give yourself the ability to pivot, because after you do one, you're going to learn a lot. And that will inform what your next one looks like. That might be, well, the food was terrible, or we need a new MC, or wow, the joke went over really well. Like you might, some of those simpler things, but you're also going to realize how the content landed, the questions that emerged, the new challenges that came up because you're trying to shift this culture and raise up leaders to inform what your next ones look like. So you can also, there's enough time in between that you maybe don't have to have all 3 planned out, because everybody listening is like, I don't want to plan all 3. I don't have enough time for that. Do one. Try it. You don't have to tell the people in that one we're going to do this 3 times a year. You can. Our highly strategic or executable folks are going to think, here's the 3 and here's what they're all going to be, and lay it all out. But give yourself a chance to pivot and just try it. Go for one. See what happens when people start having an awareness that they're a leader, that they were invested in, and that something's different.
There's probably a growth component to that too. Go for it and start small.
Yeah, right.
And then grow and continue to invite as your experience grows.
Yeah, because we're talking about an event that's 2.5, 3 hours. Do one for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? How can this event serve your purpose? Don't say, okay, we've got to do one of these.
Yeah. Oh, we have to have a meal. Where are we going to get the budget?
Yeah, we have to do a leadership day. Okay. Oh, right? Like sit down and wrestle with how this is going to help you in your context first, and then figure out, are you going to do 90 minutes, an hour? Is it going to be on a Saturday morning? Is it going to be on a Thursday night? Is it going to be in the church hall? Or are you going to position it first as to how this is actually going to help and serve your purpose of where you're going?
So maybe to wrap up our conversation, Rob, do you want to just again highlight kind of the sections of a leadership summit that like the people that are high in execution might appreciate hearing? Again, this is not written in stone.
Tammy LeBlanc.
But I think it's a good framework anyway for those that don't necessarily know where to begin.
Yeah, we'd set it up in our church hall. We'd put tables out, and because we wanted kind of that environment as opposed to just rows where you're seeing the backs of heads. It would come in, and essentially from 8:30 to 9 would be a registration thing. So we wanted to know who was there. We were inviting our leaders, things like that. We were tracking who was there, who wasn't there.
Kolaches.
Yeah. And we'd have a table. We didn't have kolaches, but there was other stuff that was there that they could help themselves to, coffee and things like that. 9 o'clock, we'd start. We'd do an icebreaker. An icebreaker would go, 10 to 15 minutes, something along those lines. And then we do a couple talks. One would be around vision, and one would be around communication. And we maybe sometimes flip-flop that. Sometimes if you want the vision to set the tone for the day, Other times you want to kind of get into the business first, get some of that out of the way, and then build on the vision afterwards. And so each of those could be anywhere from like 20, 25 minutes. Then you normally take a break, 10, 15 minutes, long enough for people to go to the bathroom, things like that, get more coffee, and come back. We'd normally do a third presentation, which would be where we'd go into kind of the specific leadership skill. This is how you recruit volunteers, or this is how you develop a communications plan for your ministry, or this is how you deal with healthy conflict, or one time we took everybody through APEST, things like that. And then that was normally like a presentation, and then we would do something interactive where they're at their table or with other people, and then we'd transition to that, and we would end with praise and prayer. So someone would lead a song or two, and we would end with those prayer triads. So kind of 3 general presentations: vision, communication, and a specific leadership skill that was interactive, and then icebreaker and prayer and praise on kind of both sides of that.
All packaged in hospitality.
Yeah, with a hospitable environment in it.
That's great. Thanks, guys. I always enjoy our conversations, but it's really cool to be in person. So I've enjoyed that. Thanks. And thank you to you, our listeners. We hope that you also enjoyed this conversation and that you will join us again for another session of the Missional Leadership Podcast. Thanks and God bless.